Hey there, Dan Reed, the culinary libertarian, on another edition of the Food Freedom, and I'm still working on a better name for that. So, when when we talk about regulation of food, or actually the deregulation of food, kind of like how when libertarians mention they don't want taxes, it's almost the trope is the response is, well, don't you care about roads? When we talk about deregulation, the big topic is milk or raw milk. And this has been ongoing for some while, sometimes with lots of vigor and sometimes not so much. There is, and it's so part of part of the problem is that the regulation of food should be on a state by state basis. The that's what the several states part means. That the Constitution was never written in as as a document for total control over all of the people in all of the places at all the time. That's that's not what it's about. And my friend Michael Bolden at the 10th Amendment Center has been pursuing this idea for a long time. I'm going to focus really just today on the raw milk thing, but focusing on decentralizing the overlord approach to food. And milk is the place that we can start this. It's been the subject of more than a few books. Um, I hope I get the name right. Gompert's Food Freedom, Life, Liberty, the Pursuit of Food Rights. I did a blog post review about that. There's some rather disturbing information in that book, which is mostly about the raw food movement. Either in L.A. there was a group of a couple of guys who had a market. These two chaps were particularly interested in eating raw everything, including chicken, which isn't necessarily my particular cup of tea, but who am I to say they can't do that? Also, the Amish farmers in Pennsylvania and I think Wisconsin who just wanted to sell raw milk. Mike Meharry, who is a writer, the chief writer, I peddled wrong, for the 10th Amendment Center, and was a guest on the Culinary Libertarian podcast, has several articles, and I'm going to read a couple of them or mention them. But the one in particular I'm looking at on my screen is from the farm2consumer.org website, which is the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Sorry, going too quickly. This was published online on November 11th, 2019. And the first paragraph reads, until last week, Kansas raw milk farmers were permitted to produce raw milk and sell it directly from the farm, but were prohibited from advertising it off premises. So it goes on to explain basically what the farmer had to do, only could do, was post a sign on the farm that you can buy your raw milk here. So if you didn't know the farm was there, how are you going to buy your raw milk? Well, that's part of the point. And so as the article goes on, and I'll put a link to this at the bottom of the page here in the more info part, the attorney, Sam McRoberts, explains the importance of the decision. So the decision is that it was struck down, that is illegal. And his explanation is, quote, this case isn't just about raw milk. It's about free speech. It's about aggressively defending the right to talk. The government doesn't get to tell us what we can or can't say. I'm proud of the Bunners, the plaintiffs, for standing up and fighting against censorship. Kansas is better off because of them, end quote. The free speech response is often used, and sometimes I think people get tired of it, except in the case here, what his point is that the government doesn't want them advertising anywhere other than their farm that you can buy and consume raw milk. And as we go through some of Meharry's articles and just the whole idea of it in general, the FDA is perfectly happy to tell you what you can and cannot consume. And if we look, and I tried to find a lot of this, and it was a difficult challenge to figure out when did this pasteurization thing begin. And what I sort of found out was, as it's a complicated issue, and I'm going to oversimplify it to make the point, but it glosses over a lot. So as communities grew and became too far from the farm for the farm to safely transport raw milk, a couple of things happened. Either you could take the risk of consuming raw milk transported too far, or to meet the demand, some less than savory farmers may have engaged in questionable practices, increasing the likelihood that the milk is not wholesome. Wholesome, of course, means safe to consume. So the pasteurization of milk to kill the bad pathogens, I guess that's sort of redundant, in the milk was seen as a benefit for human health. The problem with pasteurizing milk to kill the bad guys, well, heat is indiscriminate. It also killed the good guys, and the argument is the the good bacteria in the milk were of sufficient goodness. I'm sorry, I'm butchering this. That they would help mitigate whatever concerns may have come from the bad guys. And also, I think generally, I'm not a doctor, that the general wellness of any given human being is sufficient to fight off small sicknesses, and we do that all the time. Now, of course, the infirm, the elderly, and the young are particularly susceptible to all kinds of things, and in the food service industry, these are three classes of people that we're really attentive to make sure that as a cook, as a restaurant owner, as a farmer, as whatever you are, you have no actual interest in making your customers sick. That's not even a hard thing to figure out. So it's not an uncomplicated issue, and I can at least recognize the value of pasteurizing milk to kill the bad guys. So I'm not completely unaware of how this has helped people. My prime issue is having an agency I pejoratively use the term desk jockeys, driving desks, deciding the fate of 330 million Americans, what they can and can't do. Well, that part just seems kind of silly, and I think that there's a lot we can do, but not at the federal level. There's nothing to do. You just can't. Nobody cares. No one's going to listen. You can write a letter. It's going to go nowhere. The way change is affected is that as your local level, either starting in your town. So I've been talking about the cottage food industry, and in my state of Oregon and in lots of states, the rules are that you cannot sell from your home or at possibly, and that would change from state to state, probably, maybe even town to town, you can't sell PHFs, potentially hazardous foods. That would be things that say have pastry cream, so a pastry cream filled donut, or maybe an almond paste filled croissant, or cakes with buttercream icing, because if you don't have refrigeration at the flea market and it's sitting out, I mean, that's not wholly unreasonable. And if the buttercream melts on the cake, no one's going to buy it anyway. So it's not because the state's being generous and saying we're trying to protect the integrity of your product. I think most people who are reasonable and understand what's going on with their products aren't going to offer potentially hazardous foods for sale anyway. I think people are probably smarter than the government gives them credit for being. But because the thugs are there and they have the rules and they can enforce the rules and they will, boy howdy, they will, then we certainly aren't going, it doesn't make sense to individually just go say, oh, I'm going to show you, I'm going to nullify this potentially hazardous food law. I'm going to sell you pastry cream filled donuts. Well, I don't advise that. You could, but that's probably a silly choice. What can happen, and these things can take time, but this is how we affect change. That in your little town, find out who the county commissioners are, find out what the rules are there. Start at the local level, the county, then go to the state, and start activating for change in your state at your local level for the things that will impact you and impact the people around you. So if you are a farmer or a baker or a cook and the rules are you can't sell pasties, Google it, then there's a way it was to start the process to fix that, because there's a way that we can slowly, not particularly easily, I don't think, we can wrest back from the overlords our basic rights and making food and sharing it with people. Yes, we want to engage in a transaction, a voluntary transaction. I give you this, you give me these green pieces of paper, we're both happy. It gets into a taxation issue, but that's another, that's somebody else's show. The state has no business in that relationship. They just don't. They want to, and they will tell you that they have legitimate concerns. Show me. And it's going to, this is a big fight in terms of, it's a big entity, but that's why we start small. So the raw milk thing, Mike Meharry, the author, started, there was an article dated for the 10th Amendment Center going back all the way to, hang on, where is it? 2015. So for 4 years, this has been on Mike's radar, and Mike writes a lot. And it's one of many issues about food freedom. So with the raw milk thing comes cheese made from raw milk, yogurt made from raw milk, other derivatives made from raw milk, and kefir may be one of them, but the restrictions from government on what you can put in your body is really what we're starting to talk about, and eliminating that barrier, burden, restriction, regulation, decentralizing these kinds of things is how we're going to wrest back, I used that word already, some of our rights. And really, our rights are the things that we do that don't require the services of somebody else. I don't have a right to, for Aunt Sally, your Aunt Sally, to make me muffins. It's not a right. If Aunt Sally has to labor to do something for me, that's not a right. That's a service. And no matter how you can call it a right, but it's not. I can pay her for her time and I can pay her for her labor, and that's a transaction. But I don't have a right to her cupcakes or her bagels or her passies or whatever she's making. I just don't. That's so. I'm gonna put some of the Meharry links up on the down below the more part. Click on the more and see the links. Also, there will be a link to the cottage food page on the blog, and I hit I don't know where it is, the bell and the subscription thing. Yeah, technical terms. And me seeing you, will see you again soon. Have a good weekend.